Good evening, members of the Planning Board. Each year,
Good evening.
good to see you. Each year, the Planning Board's Rules of Procedure requires that the board name a chair and vice chair for that year. Generally, this happens at the January meeting, or it can happen at the first regular meeting of each year if one is not being held in January. The Rules of Procedure state that the staff will call the meeting to order, conduct that meeting until the chair has been named. At that time, I will turn the meeting over to the chair, and they will conduct the election for the vice chair in the same manner. So at this time, I will begin by accepting nominations from the floor for the chair of the Planning Board. Nominations will be recorded in the order in which they were received, and then I will ask twice more for any other nominations before closing the nominations. At any time before closing the nominations, a member who has been nominated may decline their nomination. At that time, I will call for a vote on the first nomination. If that first nomination has a majority vote in favor, they will be seated as the chair of the Planning Board. Once the chair has been named, again, they will take over duties of the chair and will conduct the election for the vice chair position. So, at this time, I would like to call for nominations for the chair of the Planning Board.
I'd like to nominate Sarah Glanville for the
Okay,
chairman.
very good. Any other nominations, a second call for nominations for the chair? Any other nominations? Okay. I'll make a third and final call for nominations for the chair of the Planning Board. Seeing none, I would declare all those in favor of Sarah Glanville as chair of the Planning Board for 2023, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sarah as your chair once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. And I did notice, as we were all sitting at the table, I think I was the last woman standing without glasses. And then at the end of 2022, my eyes said no more. You need them now for reading, So we will begin our nominations for vice chair. So I will read the same script here that Matthew read. I will begin by accepting nominations from the floor for vice chair of the Planning Board. Nominations will be recorded in the order in which they are received. I will ask twice more for any nominations before closing the nominations. At any time before closing the nominations, a member who has been nominated may decline their nomination. At that time, I will call for a vote on the first nomination. If the first nomination has a majority vote in favor, they will be seated as the vice chair of the board. At this time, I would like to call for nominations for the vice chair of the Planning Board.
Madam Chair, I, nominate Ed Stafford.
Thank you, Russ.
I can second.
Thank you, Dennis. Oh, shoot, what do I do now? Yes, a second call for nominations. Are there any other nominations? This is the problem with the glasses. I can't see at a distance with them on. Are there any other nominations? And then finally, a third call for nominations for vice chair. Okay. Seeing none, I will declare the nominations for vice chair of the Planning Board closed. All those in favor of Ed Stafford as the vice chair of the Planning Board for 2023, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ed Stafford as your vice chair yet again.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's see. What do we do now here? Okay, we've done that. So now we need to do roll call of the board, yeah? And I think Ty, I almost called you Ty Pennington, who was on Trading Spaces. Fun story, real quick. I was in New York in November and out to dinner saw Paige Davis from Trading Spaces. So that's why I must have had Ty Pennington on my mind. But this is Ty Cheek, who is our new planning technician, yeah?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Ty.
Yes.
Welcome.
Well, thank
Yes,
you
welcome.
very much. Thank you very much. Happy to be here. All right. Roll call for the Planning Board. Madam Chair Sarah Glanville.
Here, yeah, present.
Dennis Scholl.
Here.
Ed Stafford.
Present.
Jane Walker Payne.
Present.
Russ Walker.
Here.
Donald Dale.
Present.
Robert Kuhn. Robert Kuhn is absent. Peggy Levi.
Here.
William McLean Jr.
Present.
Sherry Richmond.
Present.
Council Representative Rebecca Rayborn.
Here.
Madam Chair, quorum is present.
Great, thank you, Ty. All right, the next thing we have to do is set our regular meeting schedule for 2023. I do want to note that there was an error in the packet, and the August 2023 Planning Board meeting date should be listed as August 14th and not August 7th. So I do want to point that out there. And I think we need to vote on this, yeah, Katie? So we need a motion to accept the regularly scheduled 2023 Planning Board meeting schedule with that change to August 14th instead of August 7th. So we have a motion
8 pages.
to accept that.
So moved.
Thank you, Russ. We have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Peggy. This is just all those in favor. All those in favor of accepting the Planning Board meeting schedule for 2023, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, we have adopted the regular meeting schedule. Now we need to approve the minutes from our last planning board, which was a while ago, gosh. July, August, July, I think. July. Which is like July, okay. So hopefully everyone had time to review the minutes. I didn't see any changes that were necessary, but did anyone see any changes necessary to the minutes?
No, I didn't see.
Okay, great. So can we get a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from July 18th.
Thank you, Sherry. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Donald, right? I was going to say, I almost said Dale. Two first names. All those in favor of accepting the minutes from the July 18th meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, the meetings are, the meetings, oh my God, the minutes are accepted. All right, now we have, we're rolling along, a public hearing for the proposed text amendment to the land development ordinance regarding the PUD zoning district. And first, we're going to have Matthew come forward to present information on the proposed text amendment.
Good evening again. As you're all aware, the town has been working diligently to complete a development agreement with D.R. Horton. During that process, it did become clear that there were some challenges to successfully implementing the development agreement, which addressed the council members, town staffs, and the citizens concerned, because there are areas where the land development ordinance, otherwise known as the LDO or simply the ordinances, that don't mesh well with our development agreement language. The LDO language could not anticipate all of the things that might come up during such a negotiation. So while the text amendment before you this evening was born from the work that we have and will have an impact upon the D.R. Horton project, I would remind you that we are not here to discuss the merits or the components of that project this evening. That is an issue that is currently before our town council. This particular text amendment is meant to simplify and clarify how development agreements work with their relation to our LDO and to allow the negotiation of higher quality components. Upon the advice of our land use attorney, Tom Terrell, Mr. Terrell drafted a good portion of the text amendment that you have before you this evening. D.R. Horton used this language to create their application for a text amendment. And then I wanted to kind of explain that the language that's in front of you is very simple. It's very effective. It just better defines the development agreements, and it helps to solidify the intent that our development agreement shall govern, where it outlines those items which have been negotiated, and where it's silent, the LDO and state or other federal laws shall govern. I know Mr. Terrell is going to be speaking to you shortly and may elaborate on that process quite a bit, but I wanted to ask at this particular time, are there any questions from board members? Sure.
I do have one, and it's the development agreement, section 5.5, the first paragraph. It's 5.1.1, and I have a plug frame here to move over.
Yes. Under the purpose?
Under the purpose, it says that the development may be used, and I question the word may.
Sure.
To state that maybe we should change it for a shall or a will, so that this is always used.
Sure. I will let Mr. Terrell explain that. May is a very, it's a, Tom, I'll let you speak to that. But it does imply that it is required. So I'm going to let him speak to that. We have had this conversation on many other occasions, and he does a much more eloquent job of explaining that than I. Any other questions this time? Yes.
Yes, I read this several times, and it's beautifully written, and I guess my caution is in so much flexibility that ordinances that we have worked on really diligently to have for our town with public input, with planning board input and council input in the past. I just hope that enough energy is spent looking at what has been in place before something is compromised. I'm sure that it will, but I just want to express that caution.
Okay. Any other questions for staff at this time?
Good point. Thank you.
I'm going to turn it over to Mr.
Oh, I did
Chair.
have something real quick, Matt.
Yes.
It's not a question, it's a statement
Okay.
that I think Sherry will appreciate from her former teacher days. I noticed on the first page of the section 8.3, description of zoning districts, in the new language that was put in at that very last sentence of the paragraph, town council is capitalized, but then in subsequent mentions of town council, it's lowercase.
Duly noted.
Is that?
Very good. At this time, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Terrell, who will walk you through the process that we've used to come up to at this point. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. It's always good to be back in Jamestown. Tom Terrell with the law firm Fox Rothschild, and I will get to your question at the end. I've brought the text up. My engagement with the town has lasted 2 years and did not think that it would last 6 months when I started this process. It's been a very long and arduous journey. I would add, by surprise, it's been a long and arduous journey. As a recap, and to create a broader context within which to think about this proposed text amendment, D.R. Horton petitioned to annex and to rezone 467 acres. They asked for it to be zoned to what is called a planned unit development, and is commonly referred to as a PUD. PUDs are not new. PUDs have been around for a long time. They widely existed, before I graduated from law school in 1985. There's a lot of towns, I think probably most towns, cities in the triad, certainly quite a few throughout the state and country, that like to use a planned unit development. And the essence of a PUD is the recognition that all land is unique. I can look at someone in real estate who understands that's a legal presumption that all land in some way is unique, whether from a market position or from a developmental standpoint. But there is a corollary assumption, and that is that all of our communities that create development ordinances have cookie-cutter ordinances that don't fully and adequately anticipate what every tract of land is going to bring. And there are times when a developer wants flexibility, or, as in this case, the town may want them to have some flexibility to create and to do things that the ordinance does not necessarily allow. Now, it's important to note, and I can't say this enough, that the town of Jamestown already has PUD zoning. And the PUD zoning that is in your ordinance is very broad and it's very expansive. The issue is that it's not fully expansive to grant flexibility. And as we have fly-specced the ordinance, we've concluded that this was not something done by design. There's nothing in the ordinance that suggests that there are a few things that the drafters very clearly did not want to be included in a PUD. It's just that the very expansive things that you can do it looks like it was intended to be very comprehensive, but when you go through line by line by line, there are things that you find that are not. Now, so if you go back 18 months, D.R. Horton approached the town, and they said that they would like to develop this land. They wanted to develop it at a density of 3.2 units per acre. By any standard in the planning community, that is deemed to be low density. Most places in this, well, anywhere that I work, 5 units per acre is that threshold. Anything below that is considered low density. But they wanted some assurance that they could develop this and get that density. And since it was not unreasonable, since that density was called for and allowed in the comprehensive plan, the town staff said, we entered a memorandum of understanding and said, the staff, now we don't control the council, but said staff will support 1,500 units. That's what you request. But you have to do quite a few things to address the quality of that subdivision because we want you to go above and beyond what the ordinance requires. So as we approached the end of the process, D.R. Horton did an incredible Herculean task of going line by line, and they came up with a 5 or 6 page single-spaced document where they gave us all these ordinance requirements and said, we're trying to do this in the development agreement, but we're really not sure if this section or that section is going to allow us to do what we're trying to do. And in almost every case, not every case, but in almost every case, it was where we were trying to lift up the quality and get something that would be more than what they could just do as a matter of routine under the law as it was written. So what this text amendment does, this is what we came up with very late in the process, was just to change the rules that we play by, to change the ordinance, to make it clear that when we're negotiating something of this complexity, we don't need to have an unintended small provision that gets in the way. We need total flexibility, not the almost total flexibility that we currently have at this point. So now I do want to address something proactively. I don't know if this question is going to come up, but I think this is a good segue into it. I was forwarded an email. I think every single one of you was sent this email today from somebody who was seemingly upset that there's no definition in this proposed text amendment for what higher quality is. Now, I was a little bit surprised, taken aback with that statement. The first answer actually is, this is why we have planning boards, this is why the citizens elect council members, is to make these decisions if something is of higher quality. But the second answer is the text amendment that you have in front of you has its own definition, and it goes into some detail as to what constitutes higher quality, and I would like to read that 2 sentences. It's the determination of what constitutes a higher quality development may include considerations such as mitigations of impact, environmental protections, public dedications, architectural controls, provisions for open space, landscaping plans, access and network connectivity, and creation of trails and other facilities available to the broader public. Modifications to the town's technical standards manual shall also be considered if the result is a project with equal or better performance. So that's the definition that is baked into the proposed text amendment. It's not a definition or a concept that has no place for you to hang your hat when you're trying to determine if it's workable. If you'll allow me 5 or 6 minutes, I'd like to run through and give you some examples of what those how that higher quality works in the development agreement that's going to town council next week, because this is what the text amendment you're recommending is enabling that agreement to do. On mitigations of impact, D.R. Horton is contributing almost 50% of the cost of a garbage truck. Now, you think that's, okay, that's 50% of the cost of a garbage truck. Those trucks cost $500,000. So this is not insignificant, and that was going above and beyond. On architectural controls, they voluntarily gave up vinyl sided walls. That was really significant. They agreed, and this came out of the meetings we had with that national urban consultant, Seth Harry, for that main street that goes all the way through the project. You have to have rear-loaded homes. It's not, you don't see garages out there as the main architectural element. You see a home as the main architectural element. They agreed that where they have end units at the end of a street, they don't like to have windows on them in many circumstances, and they now have agreed that as an architectural element, they will do some substantial landscaping to break up a blank wall. So that's on the architectural part. On open space, their original design did not include open space. When they met with Seth Harry, this was one of the things that the citizens were saying, no, this needs to have open space. So they complied, and they put in a 2-acre park that is along that main access street. That's a park they would not otherwise have done. They have also agreed to put in what are called pedestrian sheds. Every quarter mile has to have 15,000 square feet of not just open space, but usable, functional open space in some way. Now, again, that came out of the Seth Harry discussions. On landscaping, D.R. Horton and other companies, the other large production builders, are not known for their landscaping. I think we all know that. They know that. It's not a secret, but they have agreed to have understory trees, not canopy trees, but understory trees lining all streets throughout the project. But when you get to that 2-acre park, there are going to be canopy trees surrounding that park. They've agreed to use substantial landscaping, again, at the end of units. They have agreed to protect some vegetative buffers up where it's up against the Fox Hollow subdivision. I forget what it is required by the ordinance, but they are going well above that. So 50-foot guaranteed protection. They have agreed to plant berms and what is a greater than a type C landscaping buffer along Mackey and Guilford College Road. They have agreed to put up a whiteboard fence. It rhymes with what you see going down Main Street to make it look and feel Jamestown. This is not anything that they would ordinarily otherwise have done. On connectivity, that's also one of the standards that I read. Their initial site plan had 27 cul-de-sacs. They've now reduced that number to 8 so that there is connectivity. They also have internal sidewalks, both sides of the street. That's not required in the LDO. And they also have sidewalks going all along Mackey and Guilford College Road. It's about a 2-mile length of external sidewalks. One of the standards is, do they have trails and other facilities? Well, they don't have trails, but they have several miles of sidewalks through this project, and they will be dedicated to the town. And once they are dedicated, anybody who wants to walk along public sidewalks, they have a multiple-mile exercise place through those 5-foot wide sidewalks. Now, lest anybody be surprised, this was not a cram-down exercise. It was not something where these provisions were dictated by town staff. We pushed for these things, but it was a negotiated process, and D.R. Horton gets several things in this process, too. This is how these things work. I'll list a few of those for you. The main one is they get expedited plan review. It's not by much, but it's by a couple of days. It's guaranteed, and it's to help them move things along. They also, the town agreed to hire a permitting consultant to make sure that there's somebody available to make those determinations if their utilities and water lines and things meet code. They have to pay for that consultant, and that's in the agreement, but the town still hires that consultant. That was one of the things. They get an expedited upgrade to a sewer outfall. It was planned anyway. The town at some point would have to do it, but it got bumped up in schedule. They got guarantees of water and sewer capacity. The town agreed to raise some manholes. The town agreed that alleyways, which previously were considered private, are now can be considered public streets, so that we demanded that the garbage trucks go down the alleyways to pick up trash, but they can't do it if they're private. So we have to figure out a way, and this is one of the things, by the way, that this text amendment allows us to do. And this list is not exhaustive, it's illustrative, but the point is the town is benefiting considerably by this flexibility, but they do too. It is a two-way street. I do want to list, before I sit down, I do want to list one more advantage. I live in a world, I think anybody who knows me or who's read my law firm bio knows that I litigate these cases, and this is a world that I live in. I live in it all across the state of North Carolina. Lawsuits are filed challenging zoning approvals every day. And many of those lawsuits, especially for what is called a legislative decision, are gotcha lawsuits. They are based in things like, the ordinance says you have to have a 25-foot setback, but yours is only 24. Gotcha. Now, everybody here knows that you can stand back at any distance and not a single one of us can determine if it's 25 or 24 feet. But technically, you're in or you're out. And this type of flexibility helps us to avoid frivolous lawsuits like that. And that's another reason that I would recommend it to you. I'm glad I have to answer your question. I wrote it down. You were asking about why the term development agreements may be used. I think, is that what your question?
Yes.
Two things. The state statute does not require towns to do this. And for state statutes, it's permissive. You may elect to do it. But when we were discussing this language, we did not want to create any shall language that would bind the town when we didn't want to bind the town. We're saying the town may elect to, and there are times that it may not make sense. When they choose to do so, there are all these things that have to be done. That would be by ordinance and by statute. But whether you start down that path is a permissive thing.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to answer other questions.
Thank you. Do folks have questions for Tom? I do have a question. So just for my edification, so the applicant for this text amendment was D.R. Horton itself.
That is correct.
But D.R. Horton were they at all involved in writing the text amendment?
This is exactly what happened. We were sitting around the big conference room table, and we were realizing that this had to be done. And Mr. Isaacson, who's here, was going to leave and draft something. And that night, I said, I had a lot of energy. I write text amendments all the time, and I knocked this out on my own and sent it the next morning, which I think was a Saturday. And so that's how I ended up being the one drafting it. Once I did that, then there was play back and forth. Let's look at this, let's look at that. But it created a template for us to work from.
Okay. The reason I ask is because obviously this text amendment affects the future of Jamestown, not just this one project. So I didn't want it to be written by people in their own favor for one project.
No. Let me answer that a different way. In my opinion, this is a tool the town can use for the town's benefit anytime the town wants to have a PUD project. Now, I will answer another question you didn't ask. It took so much time, and yes, it's expensive to negotiate this, that you have to have a tract of land at least half this size before it's financially sensible to spend all this time doing these negotiations.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Or Sherry, go ahead.
I guess just basically a comment. I think the PUD, the black part, the original part is, we've got a lot of wonderful things in there, sensitivity to the environment.
Yep.
And then some of the added parts, especially on, I can find the section 8 point, Article 8, Section 8.3, Town of Jamestown Land Development Plan and be designed to achieve greater protection of environmentally sensitive areas. So I guess that is also what hit me earlier when someone said, how do you measure that? And how do you measure better standards? And I guess there's always that question, how do you measure that someone's going to be, protect the environment
Right.
more? Not just the present developer, but for the future. But at least in here, it's stated again, it's emphasized, so I like that part.
Yeah. I'm not sure you're asking this question either, but I'll
I don't know
answer.
what I'm asking, I guess I'm just trying to be reassured that that's going to be a part of, just going to stay here and not be
We have-
flexible, not be flexible for them.
Yeah, we have, that's right. There is no flexibility in environmental protections other than a greater protection. If it is required by the local ordinance, if it's required by county ordinance, state statute, federal law, neither the town cannot allow less, the developer can't do less. Those are the minimums, and there are actually legal presumptions that if you meet the setbacks to a wetland, meet the setbacks to a stream, that you are protecting that wetland or that stream. And I can assure you that 100% of what's required, Randleman Lake regulations, will have to be followed.
So everything is followed, of course.
Yes.
And this goes above and beyond that if in future negotiations that is important.
If this does not go,
I don't know how to say my question, I guess.
but let me, this does not go above and beyond except in a couple of places. It has an impervious surface limit that they have greater pervious surface than they could do on this track, number one. Number two, there's a provision in there on when they have the right to put utilities into stream buffers, and they are required to limit that only when absolutely necessary, and your protection on that is the technical review committee. They can't do a willy-nilly laying of pipe or anything like that.
Yes, and not referring just to this developer, but this addition helps the town in the
Yes.
future.
Oh, yes.
What?
Oh, yes, 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 yes,
In that
yes.
area.
Yes, it does. Most of Jamestown was actually developed prior to the Clean Water Act.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of subdivisions, we weren't sensitive to this. Even after the Clean Water Act, we were still piping streams, we were building close to streams, we were taking down vegetation and buffers, because that's just how we did it. That's just how we did it.
It's been a learning curve.
It has,
Over history.
yes.
But I think it's well-written, and my compliments that part of it that I was looking at.
Sorry.
Anything else? All right, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Tom.
Thank you, sir.
All right, now we will open,
Madam Chair.
oh, sorry.
I'm just going to take a moment to recognize that the applicant is here as well.
Oh, okay.
They may want to speak. Thanks.
Okay,
You'd
yeah,
be welcome.
yeah, thank you. Do we have, I don't have a name for the applicant, so does the applicant want to come up and speak?
Attorney Isaacson.
Thank you all very much, Madam Chair. It's Mark Isaacson, 804 Green Valley Road in Greensboro, and I appreciate the time and the opportunity to be before you this evening. Always tough to follow my learned brethren, Mr. Terrell, but I do appreciate the good work of the staff and Tom and others in bringing this text amendment before you. On behalf of D.R. Horton, I will tell you that we support this text amendment. We think it's a good idea for the town and for the applicant. The hallmark of this is flexibility. And I think that what we found in this process, which has taken a long time, when we went through, and Tom used the word fly spec, and I can tell you I sat in the meetings, they were long and laborious. The LDO is close to 500 pages, and we went through every page. And I used this concept one time with the council in explaining things. I think you ought to picture your desk with 3 monitors before you. So you've got the LDO, you've got this property, and you've got our development agreement. And, close your eyes for a minute and picture us sitting in a room with those 3 monitors before us, trying to go back and forth and compare an almost 500-page development agreement with this property, and the engineers sitting there telling us, now, wait a minute, you've got this hill, you've got this topography, you've got this stream. The LDO requires the following things. We're not sure we can even do that. How is this practical? So let's change this in the development agreement. And then when it was 6 pages, single space, by the way, and I have them right here, and all of our notes are on here. And that's where this started. And so when we discussed this with the staff and with Tom, when we started running into, hurdles in developing the plan and the concept for this project, it became apparent to all of us sitting around that table that the most practical way to deal with these conflicts was to develop or have a text amendment which says exactly what Tom has written, and that is providing flexibility to the town council as the ultimate arbiter of this matter every time it comes before the council. If the applicant can get over this, can prove the burden, can carry the burden of a higher quality project, then, and only then, will this council, and I'm sure it will come through the planning board for recommendation first, but only then will this council be empowered to allow a development agreement to control over the terms of the ordinance. And so that's where we are. And I have some examples if you all would like to get into the weeds on this, but in the interest of time, I would just say that we've all been working very diligently on this project and these issues, and I think we've about come to agreement on these. This is a necessary component. This text amendment is really a necessary component to enable the town to review carefully this project in detail. This development agreement, I think, is going to be around 50 pages, single space, so it's been quite a process, but we're all for it, and we want to complete this, this journey we've been on and bring a fantastic project to the town of Jamestown. So glad to answer any questions that the board may have, and we appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Go ahead, Sherry.
Well, I enjoyed our common chat about technical aspects of the Cadillacs.
That's right.
Very nice, and that to share. So I guess I just want to hear it from you, that this is something that would be applicable in the future, not just this development, but that you feel, personally, you feel that this is good too, for the town,
Right.
for a major developer.
I think that's right, Ms. Richmond. I think we set this up as a high bar. That's the way that I looked at it, was that if any applicant for a project can get over a high bar, let's say, prove this burden that the council must make these findings of a higher quality project. But in order to get here, I mean, I think it's realistic to say that the town's LDO just never contemplated a project of this scope or this size or complexity. So this was new for all of us, and I think we're plowing some well-needed ground for the town so that if and when another project of this size, scope, complexity comes along, the town now has a tool in its toolbox to deal with those issues, those challenges. And we're, I think, plowing some good, healthy ground here to provide for that for the future, if and when those kinds of projects come along.
Thank you.
I'm glad to answer any other questions.
Anything else?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we will open the public hearing to anyone that would like to speak. We ask that you come up, state your name, address, and abide by the 3-minute time limit. So if anyone would like to come on up and speak, just come on up to the podium.
Just 3 minutes.
Just 3.
My name is Susan Dickinson. I live at 608 Havershire, and I have a lot to say. I, too, have been working very diligently, hundreds of hours over, I guess, the past 6 months when I first came here in June and spoke with members of the town council, mayor, and Mr. Johnson. I am a concerned resident. I do have a stream in my backyard. I guess we're grandfathered in. I think it's wonderful. I in no way complain. We love our stream and enjoy it very much. But as I mentioned, I have been working diligently. I haven't been paid. I've done this out of a love for Jamestown and a real concern about what's going on with this, in my opinion, very messy conundrum of documents. I happen to think that the less ambiguity there is, the better. I prefer the word shall at every moment, especially when we have a project this size that is this intense and so much is involved, and it is going to change the face of our town. And I just don't see how that's a bad thing. And particularly since, you know, the Clean Water Act of 1972, we've all gotten a lot smarter since then. And our own state assembly and environmental commission realized a couple of years ago that, you know, we really need to get a grip on this because some of these developments are coming in and putting in, you know, their, I don't know, these mega developments and paving over everything, and we need to have some control. So they did enact these new watershed rules, and why that is really important to Jamestown is this map I sent to all of you today in an email that shows the watersheds. This is all the upper part of Piedmont, North Carolina, and this dark little orange areas here. Jamestown is in critical water supply. We're like one of the only areas in this entire part of Piedmont, North Carolina that's in critical water supply, watershed. That makes us very special. And so for that reason, the State Assembly gave us our own special set of rules called the Randleman Water Supply Watershed Rules that are even stricter than what a lot of the rest of the state uses. So I'm like sitting here, how can this be? That something like this, this is us, this is our area, this is going to double the population. We are critical water supply. Why are we not taking more time to get every detail in here? And you know, the rules keep changing, the documents keep changing. I'm trying to figure out what they're talking about with open space. The only open space, I can't even see this map. This map is attached to the development agreement. I've asked for a high-res, site-specific plan, excuse me. I've asked for a high-res version, but I can't. Anyway, the park is already critical water supply. It's not a gift from D.R. Horton. It's critical watershed. Anyway, it would have to be open space. So I have a lot more to say, but
Thank
you.
you. All right, would anyone else like to come forward and speak?
Hello, my name is Patricia Gray, and I live at 105 Bellwood Court in Jamestown. It's very interesting to write the number 467 acres repeatedly. But until you start to understand what that means, it doesn't really compute. So I did some computation for you, since you haven't had a chance to be in the mix here officially for 6 months. The size of this property is larger than the White House and U.S. Capitol grounds combined. It's 353 football fields. It's 2.5 times larger than UNCG. It's approximately the same size as the North Carolina Zoo built area. What does that mean? This property has lived in its own space, undeveloped, undisturbed primarily, for centuries. And what we're looking at is a property environmentally that serves us very well. How does it do that? Currently, the property affords us 392.28 metric tons per year of carbon capture. What does that mean? That means that there is less asthma in our children, less lung disease, less opportunities for viruses to expand through our community. It also affords us a very rich biodiversity on which human life cannot exist unless we protect it. This is not a small problem that you are looking at here. The biodiversity that is within that property is extremely rich, extremely powerful, and healthy for us as humans. What you hear from Mr. Terrell and Mr. Isaacson are descriptions of aesthetics, of the development, what it will look like aesthetically. Did you hear them say anything about native trees and native plants being used as an essential part of landscaping? Without the native trees and native plants, you cannot have pollinators. You cannot have birds. Consequently, you must think in broader terms about what you are thinking about okaying here. My recommendation to you is Nancy Reagan's prescription for problems. Just say no.
Thank you. Anyone else?
It's not meant for tall people. Robert Frederick, 500 Windwood Drive. This newly proposed PUD language before you is troubling to me. In particular, it's impossible to separate the PUD language from the proposer, the developer, D.R. Horton. It's also impossible to separate the proposed PUD language from the timing of it being proposed. After all, we're in the midst of 3 public hearings that have been going on for a year about D.R. Horton's proposed development of Johnson Farm. One of those hearings involves the rezoning from agricultural to PUD, as we all know. This new proposed PUD language states, quote, "It is expected but not required that the details of a PUD shall be carefully outlined and described in a development agreement negotiated with the town," end quote. This language, of course, is useful for other developers, but in this case, after a year of town staff and the land use attorney negotiating a development agreement with D.R. Horton, they still have not agreed upon these details. Instead, between the 15th of December version of the development agreement and the 3rd of January version of the development agreement, D.R. Horton has requested to modify the PUD language with what is before you to allow council to decide on its own, without your input, what constitutes higher quality. The proposed PUD language states that, quote, "Any LDO amendment standard may be modified, any one of them, upon approval by the town council and a finding that it is of higher quality." So I ask you, higher quality compared to what? If there's no standard in the PUD of what constitutes quality, how does anyone decide what higher quality is? And might the definition of higher quality change over time? Council members are elected officials, after all. This project could take 10 years, and it appears the site-specific master development plan is to be developed in stages. Do you expect the same council members to be in office 10 years from now? As Tom Terrell himself put it before you, at 1 hour, 47 minutes, and 33 seconds into his August 11th, 2021 Joint Council and Planning Board workshop, quote, "When you have a project like this, what you're looking for is very clearly defined enforcement and very clearly defined terms of development, especially things that might be completely outside the terms and conditions of a conditional zoning application," end quote. Clearly defined terms do not equate to what elected officials, 5 years from now, decide what is higher quality. I hope you agree that this is an impossible task to look at the proposed change to what the PUD is without considering who these changes are proposed by and the timing of them being proposed. Thank you for your consideration.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, good evening. My name is Lisa Keck, and I live at 108 Bellwood Court in Jamestown. To follow up on the previous speakers, I'd like to just point out that a lot of this data, a lot of this information, a lot of decision-making is being done with missing data, as far as I'm concerned and as far as fellow citizens are concerned. Missing data such as different surveys and data reports, arborist reports, updated and detailed arborist reports. We understand that there was an arborist report done, but that was a couple years ago. Endangered species report, plants and animals. Carbon capture, which you've heard Patricia talk about. There are reports, there's studies that can be done to study that very thing, carbon capture and heat sink. Watershed report, which would include an impact study. Noise and sound study for both now, current, and future. That is important for the interference of the communication of wildlife as well as humans, right? The level of noise, and also health. And also historic preservation reports. There have been none. This is a piece of property that's relatively pristine. And nobody knows what's on this property. We're talking back Civil War, back into before the war, right? We don't know what kind of activity has happened on this property. And so it would be interesting and also probably necessary for the town to understand what this property meant and means for it in its history. So, historical preservation report. It's for archaeological and for building. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Katie Gummerson, 4648 Jamesford Drive. Just a quick note, I just would really encourage you all to deep dive into this the way that we've deep dived into all of the aspects of this development. It's not just tonight that you're voting on a text amendment. You're opening the door to D.R. Horton to change our governing documents. You're opening the door to this development to begin. Only you can slow this down. It's not, you'll rewrite history if you vote tonight on this text amendment because you're changing the history of Jamestown. And I also just would like to note that earlier, Mr. Terrell said that he wrote the text amendment, but we did receive an email from Matthew Johnson said, quote unquote, the request was made at D.R. Horton's attorney on their behalf. The language of the request was reviewed by the town attorney, not written. The town's land use attorney, Tom Terrell, and D.R. Horton's attorney, Mark Isaacson. If you have questions about this issue, please direct them to me. So it was just a little bit confusing. Did he write it? Who wrote it? It just seems like we're opening the door to D.R. Horton to rewrite Jamestown's history. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello. My name's Brent Ayers. I live at 2120 Guilford College Road in Jamestown. And a couple of things kind of stand out here to me. And apart from the environmental, like that, obviously that's very important. Part of that property is in the critical watershed. If you look at the Department of Environmental Quality maps available online, I had them up earlier today. But basically what we're kind of looking at here is we've got a development agreement that gives folks a lot of shortcuts and kind of circumvents a lot of oversight. And I don't think that approving the text amendment does us any good as a town. The reason I don't think that is because, I mean, we're doing things like, you know, they've got a utility person that's, I mean, the town's hiring them, but D.R. Horton's paying them. Like, you know, a couple of things like that. Avoiding, you know, frivolous lawsuits about like 24 feet versus 25 feet. What if it's a bigger thing than 24 feet versus 25 feet? Who determines what's frivolous? And then basically we're just giving them tools to double the size of the town. Essentially, you know, they tell us that 3.2 units per acre is low density in everywhere. I mean, right around Jamestown, that's not true. Not where we live, not where we call home. And they tell us that the developer made a Herculean effort to address and reach a compromise. And the only thing that's really Herculean here is just kind of the effort to push this through and push the ball over. Essentially, I feel like we're putting together a very large jigsaw puzzle, trying to stuff as many doors as possible onto this property. You know, if I throw out a number of, like, you know, 3,500, 4,000, you know, units or something like that, 3,500, 4,000 pieces. It's tough to put together that jigsaw puzzle, but essentially, voting on the text amendment tonight gives them a pocket knife to trim those pieces and put them together. So I really kind of feel like we probably owe it to ourselves and owe it to our community a little bit better to determine whether we can be more specific, determine whether we can do a better job of holding a developer accountable for the things that our neighbors and that we ourselves who live here want to see. And I just kind of feel like that's the best thing that we can do, and by examining or either postponing or voting no on the text amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Christina Reeser, 2621 Glass House Road. Can anyone on the planning board explain the purpose of the creation and passing of the original PUD ordinance? During the November 18, 2019 planning board meeting, town planner Matthew Johnson stated that the plan unit development, or PUD, was a base zoning district that would be highly flexible for future developers. He added that it would also allow the planning board and the town council to have strict review prior to implementation. He said PUDs were generally used to regulate large-scale developments which used unified land development practices and allowed a mixture of various types of land uses while maximizing open spaces and recreational opportunities. That's what Matthew Johnson said. In the very same November 18, 2019 meeting, the planning board approved the PUD zoning amendment, stating it was consistent with the comprehensive plan because it promotes development that meets high architectural and environmental standards integral to Jamestown's small-town character. The planning board also found it reasonable because it allowed for flexible land use while allowing for oversight by appointed and elected officials. The planning board also found that the PUD zoning amendment to be in the public interest because it would allow unique development opportunities while providing safeguards to protect Jamestown charm and natural resources. This was the basis for the planning board's approval of the original PUD amendment. Everything I've stated is a matter of public record. Was this amendment foolproof? Apparently not, and yet here we are entertaining amendments to the PUD ordinance. My question to you is why? Why has it taken the town of Jamestown 1.5 years to consider D.R. Horton's request? Why, after giving D.R. Horton 90 days to get it together, the town continues hearings over and over again? Why is the town of Jamestown acquiescing to D.R. Horton's demands and altering its LDO to accommodate their proposed development? Why are we even here? As a developer, D.R. Horton is at the mercy of the town and its governing documents. It's not the other way around. When will the town of Jamestown wake up, recognize, understand, and take their job responsibilities seriously? And if these changes are recommended by the planning board and subsequently approved by the town council, wouldn't that mean the proposed D.R. Horton development would need to be rejected and kicked back to the technical review committee, as the terms of the original decision has significantly changed since the original consideration and recommendations were granted? And as always, who at town hall and or government is going to stand up for Jamestown's residents, ETJ, and community members? And as a reminder, you all have up to 190 days to make a decision on this text amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Last call. Okay, seeing no one else, we will close the public hearing. And do folks have anything they would like to discuss? Comments, questions? Go ahead, Sherry.
Of course. I think that I regret that the way things worked out, that the planning board was not involved with a lot of this, but that's just the way it worked. And so we did not have some of the input about our arborist report or some of the other things that we did ask for the previous developer, and we got some of those things. But contrary to what some people in the public may think, that we have worked very hard to do what we can legally do and I use that word seriously. And I think the staff can only legally do some things too. You have an owner of a property. And again, go back, regret, the planning board couldn't have some input in some of these things. Maybe it would have shaped it differently if we had, maybe not. We can't go back in time. But I did want the public to know that we did our best with the other situation. And that may have made this better. I think it has, because the people in Jamestown, the citizens, the staff, the council all looked at what we went through and started from there. So I think we are going to have a better situation than some people think we have. But going to a comment that was made on Article 8, Section 8.3, the last sentence that is added. A PUD shall enable an applicant, because we're talking about the applicant having freedom. Yes, that's what this says, those three words, an applicant the freedom. And then you go to create its own development standards. If you stop there, it does seem a bit onerous, you know. But it goes on. And not to be restricted by existing LDO provisions. I had that concern, that caution earlier, that some of these things we have worked on for years, some of them work, some of them need to be updated. This is where it makes sense to me. If the result is a project that is found by the town council to be a higher quality project. So at this point legally, we have to trust the public input, what the town council hears, and how they feel about it. But for the planning board, we're where we are, and this is the only place we can be, in my opinion. So that's my discussion.
Thank you, Sherry. I had the exact same thought when I was reading through this, like you said, if you stopped at certain places in that sentence, it was concerning. And I do understand, that town councils change and people have different ideas based on who's on the town council. But my thought is those are elected officials. That means they are elected by the people of Jamestown, so they're supposed to be representing the people of Jamestown. If people don't like what they're deciding, they will be voted out, and new people will come in with their standards. So I don't know that we have a better way you certainly don't want one person deciding what the higher standard is or the higher quality is. So I don't know that we have a better way, honestly, than having the town council. When I kind of read it through, these are my personal opinions now. I tried to read it from the framework of, this is not for this project. This is a text amendment to our land development ordinance. It applies to this project, but not only this project. And so, I had to keep that in mind. And what I tried to really, when I read it through, was does it weaken the town's position in any way when going through large development planning? And I didn't find that it did. That was personally, I didn't find that it weakened the town's position. I actually thought it did strengthen the town's position in terms of the town council, the town council has the final say about higher quality and these kinds of things. And then I found a lot of the, like the whole section 5.5 development agreements, I found that rather benign language that was just really put out definitions and explanations. It didn't seem, to me, controversial in any way, but maybe I didn't read it with a lens of controversy. So I did have the concern that was brought up that I asked about. It does concern me when you have a developer asking to write our land development ordinance, that creates a real conflict of interest and puts that one developer in a position that they are rewriting the rules of the town for their own benefit. But again, I try to approach it with that eye of did what was added weaken the town's position in any way? And I didn't see that it did. But that, again, that's my personal opinion on that. So.
Well, I believe Tom Terrell said he wrote that. So that's where I'm going to go with that. Also for the public's information, generally, the planning board acts independently of everybody else. We look at things differently. All of us have our feet on different places, and we all look at it independently and then make recommendations to the council. So I hope that we're doing the best we can do legally with the information that we have.
I agree. I agree, Sherry.
I agree.
Other questions or comments at all? No? Okay. Then we shall move forward, and we need a motion to either adopt the text amendment, deny the text amendment. I guess we could possibly, we closed the public hearing, so I guess we could vote to put it off till later, but are those our three options?
You could reopen the public hearing if you feel like it's necessary, but I would encourage you, if you feel comfortable, to go ahead and make a recommendation.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure we do those are the three options that we have. Is that right? Okay. So we need a motion to either adopt the text amendment, or not adopt it, but recommend that it be adopted, recommend that it be not adopted, or that we put off a decision until later. And Katie said it in a nicer way. If someone wants to make that motion, you'll have to get the language from her.
What would be the advantage of putting this off for another month?
I don't see an advantage. I don't feel like I'm going to gain any.
Does anyone need more research?
I don't feel like I'm going to gain any more information
I
in
guess that
another
was my
month. But
question.
that's, you
Yeah.
know, I'm just saying that that is an option. Those are the three options we have available to us for a motion. I cannot make a motion, so.
Lots of folks here can.
Well, I'd like to make a motion then that we recommend the adopting of the text amendment to the town council.
All right, thank you, Ed. We have a motion on the floor. Does anyone second that? Russ, thank you. Seconds the motion, and this is a roll call vote, correct, Katie?
Yes. Sherry Richmond,
Yes, with caution expressed earlier.
Donald Dale,
Yes.
Jane Walker Payne,
Yes.
Ed Stafford,
Yes.
Russ Walker,
Yes.
Dennis Shaw,
No.
William McLean Jr.,
Yes.
Peggy Levi.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. And now we need a consistency statement that Ed's going to read for us here.
Okay, we're finding this proposed amendment consistent with the comp plan. I make a motion that the proposed zoning amendment be approved based on the following. The proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the adoptive comprehensive plan of the town of Jamestown. The planning board further finds that the proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan because the land development ordinance text amendment adds language to strengthen the town's position in meeting key guiding principles of the comprehensive plan, including, number one, facilitating high quality and innovative growth compatible with the town's traditional developmental patterns. Guiding principle number one. Number two, promoting the quality of life and aesthetic standards Jamestown residents expect. Guiding principles number two. Now, number three, preserving and protecting the natural environment and vital resources. Guiding principle number 11. Number two, the proposed zoning amendment is reasonable. The planning board considers the proposed zoning amendment to be reasonable because, A, the report of the town staff finding the proposed zoning amendment to be reasonable is adopted by reference. B, the planning board further finds that the proposed zoning amendment is reasonable because the text amendment strengthens the town's role in managing large-sized developments that significantly affect the town's resources and its residents. The new Section 5.5 Development Agreements adds regulatory language that furthers the town's position during the developmental process. And number three, the proposed zoning amendment is in the public interest. The planning board considers the proposed zoning amendment to be in the public interest because, A, The report of the town staff finding the proposed zoning amendment to be in the public interest is accepted by reference. B, the planning board further finds that the proposed zoning amendment is in the public interest because the language added through the proposed text amendment clarifies a system of checks and balances that includes town staff, the town council, state statute, and public review. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was a motion. We need a second.
It's a motion?
Yeah, that's a motion. Would anyone like to second that?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Jane. And is this a roll call? Just a regular? Okay. All those in favor of adopting the consistency statement, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, that has passed. And, okay, now we have public comment. Did anyone sign up for public comment?
Nobody signed up.
All right, thank you. And so then we need a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion that we adjourn this meeting.
Thank you, Sherry. Can we get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jane. And all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, we are adjourned. Oh, I forgot to do my gaveling earlier.